There are so many mass shootings now that it can be difficult to even keep track of them. The sad fact is that these incidents are now so common that you probably won't even give them a second thought 15 seconds after you hear about them. But there's one of these criminals whose identity has been immortalized through memes, even though he himself is likely unaware of it. Patrick Crusius, the El Paso, Texas shooter who killed 23 people in a Walmart. Following the massacre in August of 2019, his face was turned into a Wojak, which has been spread across the internet in thousands of different iterations. Today, I'm going to dive into the details of this tragedy and analyze why his face is now considered a permanent fixture of internet culture. Before we get right into Patrick's crime, we must understand who he was in the years leading up to it, and who his family was. Patrick Crusius, one of two twins, was born in 1998, hailing from Allen, Texas, an upper-middle-class suburb of Dallas. He also has an older brother, with all of the kids being parented by John and Lori Crusius. Lori had been working as a nurse in Texas since 1990. Meanwhile, Patrick's father, John Brian Crusius, is listed as a licensed counselor and instructor for alcohol education programs for minors. But that's really only scratching the surface of who he truly is. As the most self-documented member of the entire Crusius family, John has a lot of lore. For a lot of his life, he was a typical American dude, managing restaurants like Chili's and Outback while simultaneously pursuing higher education, getting a bachelor's degree in management and a master's in counseling. But coinciding with his counseling degree, his life appeared to take a very different turn around 2005, when he became heavily invested in working with therapeutic institutions. He even opened his own business, which is either titled Energy Immersion Therapy or Infused Being Therapy. Now, the reason I say either is because he himself refers to it by both names, but as far as I can tell, it's just one business. Either way, this business focuses on helping people who are chemically dependent, or in other words, are struggling with drug addiction. He also offers online treatment through the platform BetterHelp, which you may remember for its controversy from October of 2019.
In their own terms of service, they acknowledge that if you are using this site, it is not a complete substitute for face-to-face examination and for a session by a licensed qualified professional. So it's marketed as a cheaper substitute for therapy, when in reality, it's a luxury. It's an addition to therapy.
However, after the controversy, they've made a bit of a comeback, sponsoring a number of different YouTubers and continuing to employ therapists. For the purpose of today's video, the issues that BetterHelp may or may not have is not really that important. But what is important is that the entire life of John Crusius became focused on therapy and addiction treatment. This is because John himself had struggled with substance abuse issues for 3 decades. The Daily Mail wrote an article about this topic where John claims that his addiction went as far back as age 16. He was quoted as saying, "I was always the one daring everyone else to go over the top in the partying category by taking the extreme amounts of whatever we had, whether it was Quaaludes, alcohol, magic mushrooms, or something else." Unfortunately for him, his drug use would eventually manifest in some legal consequences. In 1976, when he was 20 years old, he was arrested and convicted on a drug charge. While it didn't send him in the slammer for too long, he was sentenced to a year of probation. It seems like after this point in time, he did make an honest effort to improve his life. But with that being said, he also admitted that after over 5 years working as a sobriety counselor, he himself continued to relapse. Not only is this circumstance bitterly ironic, a drug counselor who needs drug counseling, but it would also take a toll on those around him. Firstly, it affected his relationship with his first wife and child, who he had left in California, but it also affected his second family, the one that Patrick belonged to. At one point, it got so bad that Patrick's mother made John sleep in a separate area of the family home until he got his shit together. Unfortunately, he did not. Their problems came to a head on Christmas Eve of 2011, when John suddenly got a call from his teenage daughter, Patrick's twin sister, breaking the news that his wife Lori had left for Oklahoma, leaving the kids home alone. John's reaction was to stop by a warehouse store and try to steal a computer hard drive. Now, I can't seem to find any good explanation for why he acted out in this specific way, but I'm gonna assume he was just crashing out following the impending doom of his relationship. John was immediately caught and arrested, spending multiple multiple days in a county jail. It's uncertain if there was a specific substance-related event that caused Patrick's mother to file for divorce in 2011, or if it was just a more general accumulation of problems over time, which led to a separation. But whatever the case is, this incident made John prioritize a few different things. One of them was spiritual healing, and another was recovery from drug abuse. And both of these priorities led him to dive deep into the world of alternative medicine and meditation. He even wrote a book about it, which is where the majority of this information comes from. It was published in 2014 and is available on Amazon to this day, titled Life Enthusiasm: A Path to Purpose Beyond Recovery. Now, the contents of this book detail not only his struggle with addiction from his young adulthood, but also what followed the 2011 incident where he and Lori split up. Basically, the story goes that John is distanced from his family because of his drug problems. As a result, he goes on a spiritual pursuit, and after that point, he had a series of hallucinations and visions during his meditation sessions. And in one of them, he claims to have had a direct conversation with Jesus Christ himself. This is definitely a pretty bizarre detail. Regardless of what effects this journey had on him and his family, within a year of the divorce, John seems to have actually made some improvements, and he was personally treating a musician named Eric Keys for PTSD after he had been the victim of a shooting. However, in that same year, Patrick's father would show that he wasn't quite drug-free yet. In a blog entry he wrote, he claimed that in 2012, he was suffering from lower back pain and pervasive neck pain, with rashes on his legs, severe tooth decay, pain and weakness in his right elbow that physically impaired him, a torn meniscus, which he had neglected doing physical therapy for, and numbness in his feet. All of these recurring health issues led him to take Adderall, Xanax, and Zoloft as methods of coping with the pain. But 2 years later, in 2014, the same year he wrote the blog entry, he claimed to have solved most of these issues and gone off of his meds, thanks to, quote, cranial sacral massage and, quote, energy and sound healing, which, as some of his blog posts detail, included the use of crystals. Even if he was already a devoted therapist for many years at this point, and heavily into meditation, this was a very strange addition to his practice. And it's worth noting that he himself says that he started to implement these in his practice thanks to healers that were personally trained by another miracle healer named John of God from Brazil.
I had a group of healers that were trained by John of God in Brazil who came through wanting to rent my space. I rented the space to them and helped them unload their van. We unloaded these large containers with something very heavy in them. I brought them all in and helping him unpack them, and they were crystal bowls. Big deal, because the crystal bowls, as you probably already know, will know very shortly, that changed the whole course of my therapy. I was already a therapist, but I was just doing talk therapy. So when I found the crystal bowls and had my first experience with them, with those healers, I was completely called to use them and integrate them into therapy.
Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with who John of God is, he's a Brazilian spiritualist who is making a lot of waves in the early 2010s. So many waves that in 2013, he wound up on Oprah.
Are we all, in some sense, missionaries of God? Do we all have the possibility in our own way to be a medium for God?
Todos nós somos médium.
Everybody is a medium
Pratica o bem.
who practices good, and we are all children of God.
But it would all fall apart for John of God when, years later, he was accused of raping over 600 women and was eventually sentenced to nearly 500 years in prison. Obviously, this is not to say that John Crucius or these healers trained by John of God were necessarily complicit or even knew about what was happening, but it has been noted by some that this degree of esotericism tends to go hand in hand with a kind of tunnel vision, a state of mind where any issues that aren't related to spiritual practices and beliefs don't receive the appropriate amount of attention. Case in point, if we take a look at John Crucius's blog, which has dozens of posts about how much his spiritual growth has improved his life, it contains 2 posts about his dog, but barely any mention of any of his kids, and no mention at all of how his enlightenment had improved his relationship with them after the 2011 incident. Now, I don't mean to use this to blame John for what eventually happened, because ultimately, the person at fault is Patrick. But what I do want to say is that these details about John have obviously led to a lot of conversation about the circumstances that may have negatively incubated the mind of someone like Patrick. According to psychological evaluations of Patrick Crucius in the years following his crime, he was prone to mental illness virtually from birth. As I mentioned previously, Patrick has a twin sister, and while she grew up completely normally, he did not develop nearly as fast as she did, whether it was crawling, walking, or speaking and relating to other people. Ultimately, he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder with the potential for psychotic episodes, which had gone undiscovered for his entire life until after his crime. Now, schizoaffective disorder itself is not schizophrenia. Instead, it combines symptoms of schizophrenia with symptoms of mood disorders. For example, schizophrenia is known to cause hallucinations and delusions, while the mood disorder part would refer to things like mood swings and depression. One incident from his childhood that I've seen mentioned by news articles covering Patrick's earlier life is that he briefly ran away from home in 2014. His parents would call the police letting them know, but ultimately Patrick would return just 30 minutes later. Now, at the time, it was probably seen as a pretty typical instance of a kid acting out. I remember that I told myself I was running away from home once when my mom took away my Xbox, but in Patrick's case, maybe in retrospect, this is an incident that should have been taken more seriously, hindsight being 2020 and all that. It's also worth saying that 2014 is the same year all of his dad's blog posts were made, the same year he published his book, which, from what we know publicly, could have been the peak of John's investment in esoteric spirituality and all of that. But ultimately, it seems like whatever serious developmental issues Patrick had either weren't obvious to his parents, or we just don't have information about what they thought about those issues. Instead, the most we're able to learn about Patrick growing up is from his classmates. We're gonna start with elementary school. At this point in time, Patrick was described as pretty normal, even joining team sports like soccer and basketball. But things began to fall apart soon after his parents' divorce. In 2013, Patrick enrolled in Liberty High School, where his mom was employed as a teacher, although she left her position to go back to being a nurse pretty quickly. A short period after being enrolled at Liberty, he once again had to change schools and started attending Plano High School. Now, this is kind of speculation on my part, but from my own knowledge, constantly changing schools can have a negative effect on any kid's development. This is because it can destroy a kid's sense of permanence. Whatever friend group they had at their old school is now completely gone. They have to make new friends. But in Patrick's case, it seems like he didn't have any friends at all. Once he started attending Plano High School, we start seeing reports of social dysfunction from Patrick. One classmate of his from this time period described him as being frequently bullied by his Hispanic classmates. This person would also comment that the staff looked the other way and didn't do anything about it. Now, it may seem odd that I specifically note that they were Spanish speaking, so I do want to say that I'm not implying they bullied him because they were Hispanic. Unfortunately, sometimes kids are just mean growing up, especially when they haven't experienced enough life to understand how these slights against someone can affect them during early stages of their life. However, as I move forward, you'll see that this specific ethnic detail about his tormentors is something that would become increasingly relevant to Patrick. Also during this time period, he's been described as having an aversion to loud noises, having an interest in snakes, and spending his time playing Halo. Now, this next line is gonna kind of come out of nowhere, but it's not the case that playing Halo, having an interest in snakes, and not liking loud noises means you have autism. However, after his crime, his lawyer would state that he is on the autism spectrum. I think it's also important to say here that these potential diagnoses are not necessarily going to cause someone to commit a crime, but it would be a lie to say that in this specific instance, these conditions and disorders did not contribute to what Patrick ultimately did. He basically had no friends. What little connections he may have had at Liberty High School probably went away once he moved to Plano. He may have had autism, and on top of that, he was being bullied. All of these things are contributing factors to an extreme level of social isolation. During the 3 years he spent at Plano High, people also noticed him muttering to himself during class. He was not fitting in, his mental health was floundering, and it didn't seem like anyone was picking up on it besides his classmates, who weren't really in a position to do much about it. A former neighbor of his who rode the bus with Patrick claimed that he hated kids who played sports or joined the school band. It would seem that at this point in his life, he not only didn't have anyone he was close to, but he also had some level of resentment for others who did have a successful social life. In an article from the Los Angeles Times, they managed to speak to the son of a former neighbor, who described how Patrick would often walk to school with his sister and her friend friends, but he would walk while being separated from the group, either far ahead or far behind. This suggests that he probably wasn't that close with any of them, maybe not even his sister. Instead, he was only walking to school with them out of obligation or convenience. This particular person also noted that he always kept to himself, and this is reflected in the testimony of another classmate who described him as a standoffish loner who didn't interact or even talk to anyone. Meanwhile, someone else claimed that he was strong-minded, and despite his lack of social tact, at one point he did have the ambition and intention of leading school projects, although it didn't really work in his favor as he tended to be very combative. This defensive attitude he reportedly had may have been related to how much he was picked on, whether it be for how he spoke, his hand-me-down clothing, or pretty much anything he did. A former classmate named Patrick Wilson said this: "He was picked on in class for reasons I don't even really know. He seemed like a quiet kid, just went to class, left class, contributing to class, but a little overbearing at times. It seemed constant. No one really wanted to work with him in group settings because he would do his own thing. He would sit there and act like he was listening to you, and then he would go do his own thing, and people would complain about that. Every time I looked up in class, it was someone new speaking negatively to the kid. Patrick is dumb, Patrick is stupid, etc." It seems like during high school, this defensive Redditor attitude slowly morphed into becoming increasingly depressed and despondent. In his later years, he almost stopped speaking altogether, only opening his mouth to say, quote, off-the-wall statements. So Patrick already had some serious mental health issues. He had reportedly been bullied by some Hispanic classmates, and we have no record of anyone being a very close friend to him, or really even being a friend in general. Now, before we move forward, I do want to address one piece of information that I think is probably misinformation. It's been claimed in a few places online that Patrick was suspended from school for writing a list of female classmates that he wanted to sexually assault and murder. But as far as I can tell, this list incident is actually attributed to a different shooter, who is going to come up later as his crime is indirectly related to Patrick's. But going back to our main story, the northern suburbs of Dallas where Patrick grew up had been undergoing a rapid demographic change. Collin County went from a population of over 80% white to barely more than 50%, with many of these emigres coming from South and Central America, so you can probably see where this is going. Patrick began to identify with extreme and violent ideologies that he exposed himself to online, although it was a gradual process and not some overnight episode-like event. Unfortunately, details on this are sparse. We don't actually have much of his digital footprint because social media companies wiped most of it directly after his attack. We do know he had a Twitter account with the handle Outsider609. He had made it in October of 2017, and although only screenshots of it still exist, we can see that it wasn't the extremism he would become known for. Instead, it was some pretty generic right-wing stuff for that time period. The account would go inactive the same year. He also had a Google Reviews account where his profile picture shows him holding a giant Snickers bar. The only review on the account shows him reviewing a breakfast restaurant in San Antonio where he says, "Perfect place for brunch." Besides this, there's an empty MyFitnessPal, an empty Pinterest, and an old LinkedIn from when he was still in high school. Here is what the About section reads: "I'm not really motivated to do anything more than what's necessary to get by. Working in general sucks, but I guess a career in software development suits me well. I spend about 8 hours every day on the computer, so that counts towards technology experience, I guess. Pretty much just gonna see what technology careers present themselves to me. Go with the wind." Based on his description, this is not exactly someone who any company would be eager to hire. In fact, I'd say this seems like an account from someone who doesn't really care about much of anything. He clearly is indifferent to if he gets a job or not, and seems to have only picked software development because he spends a lot of time on his computer. And it's also important to keep in mind that as far as we know, this prolonged computer time was not doing anything productive. He was, for all intents and purposes, the definition of terminally online. Now, I haven't been able to find a screenshot of this part of his profile, but under his activities, he apparently wrote, "I don't really participate in extracurricular activities because of a lack of freedom." I'm not really sure what he meant by this. The obvious interpretation is that he's not allowed to by his parents. But then again, it doesn't seem like his parents are the overbearing helicopter kind. If anything, the opposite seems to be the case. So what this lack of freedom was is kind of up in the air. The last thing noted from his LinkedIn is that he says he worked as a grocery store bagger for 5 months, which he only stopped working because he lost his means of transportation. I assume he either had car issues or he was using someone else's car, and for whatever reason, he lost access to the vehicle. From the end of 2017 until the last few months before he committed his crime, Patrick was attending Collin County Community College. It's at this point in time when law enforcement believes he got heavily into online white nationalist discourse, frequenting sites like 4chan and 8chan, although law enforcement claims that he didn't really post as much as he just lurked on these forums. Now, I will say that based on my time using 4chan, it's pretty unlikely that anyone, even law enforcement, can know for certain that he wasn't actively posting. Archiving on 4chan is very sparse, and the crushing majority of old threads on those websites just get banished to the shadow realm, along with any metadata that would make it possible to verify what posts belong to Patrick. I just find it somewhat unlikely that he lurked for 2 years straight and became extremely immersed in these online subcultures without making any significant posts. But regardless, him being active on these sites is attested by officials who investigated the case. Despite his adoption of these views, the Crucius family lawyer claims that, according to his family's interactions with him, Patrick's private behavior toward them didn't at all reflect a change in his temperament or worldview. Of course, this is the family's lawyer talking, and on top of the sheer game of telephone being played here, this lawyer obviously isn't going to say something that implies that there were plenty of signs Patrick was insane that were being ignored by the family. Even if there were signs, the majority of people, especially older folks, wouldn't really be able to pick up on this kind of transformation. It's only in mid-2019 that some serious red flags started flying for Patrick Crucius. During this time period, he bounced around family homes, sometimes being with his mom and siblings, and at other times living with his grandparents, which is where he was until June of 2019 when he was kicked out. But why was he kicked out? Well, it's because he decided to purchase a Wasser 10, a Romanian production of the AK-47. This was extremely odd for Patrick, as he had never expressed any interest in guns, shooting ranges, hunting, or anything of that sort. So as soon as his mother caught wind of it, she called the local police department. And this is where reports slightly differ. In one article, it's claimed that his mother, Lori, simply wanted to know if it was legal for Patrick to even own a gun. And when she found out that it was, she had absolutely zero concern about any violence or imminent threat. However, in another retelling of how the call went, she was outright saying that her son shouldn't have the gun and that it should be taken away from him by law enforcement. In this story, she's even specifically cited as saying he is mentally ill, and that's why he shouldn't have a firearm. Regardless of which story is true, the latter contains some additional information, which is that Patrick was actually staying with his mom at the time he originally got the gun, and so she kicked him out. In turn, he decided to stay with his grandparents, but this also didn't work out, as his grandfather allegedly told him, "I'm going to give you 3 choices, Patrick. I will buy the rifle from you, you will send the rifle back, or you will turn it over to the police department. But if you're going to keep the rifle, you are not going to stay here." Apparently, this gun was very important to Patrick, so he went to stay with his dad, who allowed him to keep it and even took him to some shooting ranges, considering it a good bonding experience. It's worth noting that all of this information is coming from the aforementioned family lawyer, although in the same breath, he goes on to claim that Patrick's father was unstable, which leads me to think he's actually the mom's lawyer, not the whole family's. As much as it does seem that Patrick's dad is a bit on the stranger side, the claim that he is unstable is being made by this lawyer guy, not me. Now, before we get into the immediate lead up to the crime, I have to give some context. Just 3 months prior to Patrick's purchase of the gun, the infamous terrorist attack in Christchurch, New Zealand took place, where Brenton Tarrant, a heavily armed man, took the lives of over 50 Muslims in 2 different mosques. His crime was live streamed, where he, trying to get as much attention as possible, uttered the words "subscribe to PewDiePie" before murdering countless innocents. Now, at the same time this crime was committed, Brenton also published a manifesto where he outlined his ideology, being the reason why he committed the attack. He identified himself as an eco-fascist, with one of his ideas being the Great Replacement Theory. Essentially, the idea that, for one reason or another, non-white immigrants are moving into primarily white areas of the world, changing the racial breakdown of the area. This idea has been reposted, recontextualized, and reinterpreted so many times that to really nail down any one idea as to the theory or cause of it is difficult. Some people on the far right believe it's being done by, and this is me quoting here,
the Jews.
Some others believe it's a natural consequence of a multicultural society and relaxed immigration laws. But the one thing that is consistent across anyone who believes in this idea is that it's a bad thing. Brenton Tarrant specifically believed it was bad for a number of reasons, but as the name eco-fascist suggests, for him, it also concerned the environment, believing immigration would have a negative effect on nature. Brenton Tarrant's crime was notorious when it happened, and it unfortunately inspired a long string of other terrorist attacks over the coming years, coming from all sorts of deranged, ideologically obsessed, terminally online individuals. I went over most of these incidents in my Manifesto Killer Iceberg video, but the important thing here is that what becomes clear about all these guys is that very little of what Brenton believed and expressed in his manifesto was actually echoed one-to-one by his copycats. But what translated almost perfectly every single time was the method. A mass murder in places with mostly unarmed people, a manifesto posted on 8chan or some other mostly unmoderated online space, and writings on the guns. Although Patrick's family was none the wiser at the time, he had been heavily exposed to online radical discourse over the past half a year or so, and he happened to stumble onto Tarrant's crime and manifesto, which, in his mind, was inspiration to do the very same thing. On the 27th of July, Patrick wrote a note in which he told his family he was going to die, and he asked for their forgiveness for what he was about to do. About a week later, around midnight from the 2nd to the 3rd of August, 2019, Patrick got his gear and started driving. 10 hours later, he had driven 650 miles throughout the entire night, from Allen, Texas, where he grew up, all the way to the city of El Paso, where he finally stopped to post his manifesto to 8chan just 45 minutes before he committed his crime. Patrick's manifesto is titled The Inconvenient Truth About Me. For whatever reason, the document is often listed as being titled just The Inconvenient Truth, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it may be due to formatting issues, as this detail isn't one that really makes sense to change for any other reason. Regardless, it opens with the following paragraph. In general, I support the Christchurch shooter and his manifesto. This attack is a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. They are the instigators, not me. I am simply defending my country from cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by an invasion. Some people will think that this statement is hypocritical because of the nearly complete ethnic and cultural destruction brought to the Native Americans by our European ancestors. But this just reinforces my point. The natives didn't take the invasion of Europeans seriously, and now what's left is just a shadow of what was. My motives for this attack are not at all personal. Actually, the Hispanic community was not my target before I read Brenton Tarrant's manifesto. So far, there are already a few things worth commenting on. First off, the notion that this wasn't a personal attack. Given that classmates of his described him as being relentlessly bullied by Hispanic people during his school years, this is something I find hard to believe. Although it's possible that even Patrick wasn't aware of his own psychological motivations entirely when he did the crime. Secondly, while the genocide of Native Americans is widely accepted, it's also often denied by heavily online far-right ideologues, a group that Patrick seemingly wants to present himself as. Given Patrick's extremism was such that he was willing to murder innocent people over it, you would think that he would be a bit more deep into the Kool-Aid. However, pairing both of these with the relatively short window of radicalization given by law enforcement, just half a year or so, it seems that although he definitely meant the things he said here, he was very much on the shallow end of his own ideology. It's possible that he wanted this attack to look purely political to avoid being seen as a personally motivated mentally ill guy who killed innocent people because they were the same ethnicity as his high school bullies. But as we're going to see during his interrogation later, his motivations are not the easiest to understand. Ultimately, the last thing these mass shooters want to do is look pathetic, so it would make sense for him to try and stave off that narrative. He continues with the following. The inconvenient truth is that our leaders, both Democrat and Republican, have been failing us for decades. They are either complacent or in involved in one of the biggest betrayals of the American public in our history: the takeover of the United States government by unchecked corporations. I could write a 10-page essay on all the damage these corporations have caused, but here is what is important. Due to the death of the baby boomers, the increasingly anti-immigrant rhetoric of the right, and the ever-increasing Hispanic population, America will soon become a one-party state. The Democrat Party will own America, and they know it. Although the Republican Party is also terrible. Many factions within the Republican Party are pro-corporation. Pro-corporation equals pro-immigration. But some factions within the Republican Party don't prioritize corporations over our future. So the Democrats are nearly unanimous with their support of immigration, while the Republicans are divided over it. In short, immigration can only be detrimental to the future of America. Continued immigration will make one of the biggest issues of our time, automation, so much worse. Some sources say that in under 2 decades, half of American jobs will be lost to it. Of course, some people will be retrained, but most will not. In the near future, America will have to initiate a basic universal income to prevent widespread poverty and civil unrest as people lose their jobs. Achieving ambitious social projects like universal healthcare and UBI would become far more likely to succeed if tens of millions of dependents are removed. This part is interesting because it definitely seems like there was some Ted Kaczynski Unabomber influence weaved into his worldview, with his concerns about corporations and automation. And this undercurrent becomes even more pronounced as his document goes on. Again, this specific combination of talking points is hardly the default configuration of far-right beliefs. It seems like Patrick is pulling from highly selected sources, even if he can't or isn't willing to explain them as in-depth as other mass shooters like Brenton Tarrant. Over the next paragraph, he harps on how simultaneously expensive and useless a bachelor's degree has become, and how that's contributed to unemployment or college-accredited people having menial, low-paying, and unfulfilling jobs. While this in and of itself is hardly surprising or even controversial to a lot of people, it's what he says right after that is pretty unusual. Our lifestyle is destroying the environment of our country. The decimation of the environment is creating a massive burden for future generations. Corporations are heading the destruction of our environment by shamelessly over-harvesting resources. This has been a problem for decades. For example, this phenomenon is brilliantly portrayed in the decades-old classic, The Lorax. Yes, he actually cited the Lorax in his mass murder manifesto. Everything I have seen and heard in my short life has led me to believe that the average American isn't willing to change their lifestyle, even if the changes only cause a slight inconvenience. The government is unwilling to tackle these issues beyond empty promises since they are owned by corporations. I just want to say that I love the people of this country, but goddamn, most of y'all are just too stubborn to change your lifestyle. So the next logical step is to decrease the number of people in America using resources. If we can get rid of enough people, then our way of life can become more sustainable. While he continues to mention immigrants throughout the entire document, he couches the mention of get rid of enough people with criticisms of Americans, a word that I assume he wouldn't use to describe immigrants. This leads me to think that he's not making a distinction here, and he really means just getting rid of as many people as necessary until whatever it is he thinks is the ideal society starts working. If you don't know, this is what's referred to as neo-Malthusianism, the belief that sheer volume of population or overpopulation is bound to wreak havoc on society, regardless of how it's organized or what efforts it makes to get it under control. Therefore, it seems Patrick's only solution is to reduce it by any means necessary. Even for extreme right-wing standards, this idea is pretty out there. But just as he was getting into the more complicated topics, Patrick cut this section of his manifesto short and started writing about his gear. However, he does drop a few more significant pieces of information, even if he struggles to do so. Over the remainder of his document, he writes this: I didn't spend much time at all preparing for this attack. Maybe a month, maybe less. I have to do this before I lose my nerve. My whole life, I have been preparing for a future that currently doesn't exist. The job of my dreams will likely be automated. My death is likely inevitable. If I'm not killed by the police, then I'll probably be gunned down by one of the invaders. Capture in this case is far worse than dying during the shooting because I'll get the death penalty anyway. Worse still is that I would live knowing that my family despises me. This is why I am not going to surrender even if I run out of ammo. If I'm captured, it will be because I was subdued somehow. My ideology has not changed for several years. My opinions on automation, immigration, and the rest predate Trump and his campaign for president. I'm putting this here because some people will blame the president or certain presidential candidates for the attack. This is not the case. I know that the media will probably call me a white supremacist anyway and blame Trump's rhetoric. The media is infamous for fake news. Their reaction to this attack will likely just confirm that. Based on this, as well as his LinkedIn profile, we can see that a part of Patrick's motivation was his general sense of hopelessness, the feeling that he had no future worth fighting for. But also, to be clear, once the crime happened, Patrick did actually surrender without any fight. He didn't die, and during his court proceedings, he actually cooperated with a defense strategy that claimed he was under the impression he was carrying out orders from Trump. All of this is to say two things. Firstly, there is some information in here that I believe does reflect the reasons for why Patrick did what he did. But at the same time, much like a lot of manifestos and documents written by mass criminals, this is performative. His pretense is to posture and present you with what he wants you to see him as, not necessarily who he actually is. Only tiny little inklings of the truth come through, like when Patrick says he dreads the notion that his family will be mad at him, despite him knowingly planning to go somewhere and take the lives of multiple people who also have families. Most of the ideological statements he makes in this manifesto are short, run-on sentences, almost as if he's trying to write from his memory of things he saw posted on image boards and isn't really remembering enough to weave them into whole paragraphs. I made this same point in my manifesto iceberg video, but with most of these guys, it's not necessarily that they have an extremely intense obsession that drives them to kill. It's more so that in their minds, for whatever developmental or psychological reason, they feel that they have very few reasons not to kill people. Patrick was evidently not that well versed in his own beliefs, despite trying to play it up. But regardless, it was enough for him to go out and do what he did. After driving across the entire state of Texas in his family's 2014 Honda Civic, Patrick arrived in El Paso around 8 a.m. He hadn't actually traveled there with a clear target, instead just hoping to make his decision once he arrived. So he drove around a bit, stopped by a pizza place, which was closed, and then pulled into a Walmart in East El Paso around 9 a.m. But this is not when the shooting started. Instead, he actually entered the store and walked around for half an hour. Then he left, came back, and bought an orange, the last thing he would eat as a free man. After finishing his fruit, he returned to the vehicle. By the time all of this was done, it was already past 10 a.m., at which point he posted his manifesto to 8chan. 8chan had been created all the way back in 2013 as a response to what the creator, Frederick Brennan, saw as a loss of freedom of speech online. With its general attitude of no rules, it could be that Patrick thought of it as a good place to drop his reasons for why he committed the attack. But it's more likely he posted it there because it's the same site where Brenton Tarrant had released his manifesto. He started a thread titled "It's Time," which read, "This is going to be so bad, but I can't wait any longer. Do your part and spread this, brothers. Of course, only spread it if the attack is successful. I know the media is going to try to frame me incorrectly, but y'all will know the truth. I'm probably going to die today. Keep up the good fight." At first, he accidentally posted something related to school as the attached document, but he came back to the replies to leave the actual PDF of his manifesto. At 10:37 a.m., he got his gear out of the trunk and then started opening fire. I'm not going to get into the details of what went down. What matters is that he robbed 23 innocent people of life, and I think our time here would be better spent going over who they were. Andre and Jordan Anchondo were shot while shielding their 2-month-old son from gunfire. Arturo Benavides was a decorated Army veteran and retired city bus driver. Maribel Hernandez and her husband, Leonardo Campos, were both killed. Raul and Maria Flores had moved from California to Texas to retire. Jorge Cavillo Garcia was fundraising for his granddaughter's soccer team when he was killed. Guillermo Garcia was also shot while fundraising. Following the shooting, he would spend 9 months undergoing surgeries before ultimately dying of his injuries. Adolfo Hernandez and Sarah Regalado were a married couple from Mexico, both in their 60s. Angelina Anglisby was an 86-year-old devout Catholic who spent most of her life living 10 minutes away from the Walmart where she was shot. Alexander Gerard Hoffman was born in Germany. He retired from the Air Force in the 80s and is survived by 3 children. David Johnson was shot in the checkout line while shielding his wife and granddaughter from the gunfire. Luis Alfonso Juarez was 90 years old when he was shot. He is survived by 7 kids, 20 grandkids, and 35 great-grandkids. Maria Roth was 58 years old. She was running running errands while waiting for her teenage daughter to arrive at El Paso Airport when she was shot dead. Elsa Mendoza Marquez was a special education teacher from Mexico. She was 57. Ivan Filiberto Manzano had worked in sales and marketing. He was 46 and is survived by a wife and 2 kids. Gloria Irma Marquez had 4 children and grandkids, being killed at 61. Margie Record was killed at 63. More than 4,000 people attended her funeral. Javier Rodriguez was 15 years old when he was killed while shopping for school supplies. Teresa Sanchez was 82. Before retirement, she was a biology teacher who lived in El Paso for 30 years. She was shot in the Walmart but died peacefully the next night. Juan Velasquez and his wife Nicolosa were shot in the parking lot. While she survived, Juan did not. He was 77 and left behind a wife, 6 children, and a dozen grandchildren. There's really no overstating the gravity of this crime. It's one of the most fatal mass shootings ever carried out on American soil. During his rampage, Patrick was actually surprised with how long he was able to continue shooting. A whole 3 minutes just mowing down innocent victims before he decided to stop and walk back to his car, during which he expected either a citizen or the police would show up and start shooting at him. When that didn't happen, he pulled out of the parking lot and decided to call the police himself to surrender, but he didn't manage to get through to anyone. Ironically enough, the reason he couldn't get through is because, according to him, the automated 911 operator was stuck looping between English and Spanish instructions for the bilingual population to get a human operator that speaks their language. So he stayed in the car, waiting for law enforcement to arrive. 20 minutes later, 2 Texas Rangers and 1 cop pulled up, expecting an active shooter, only to find a compliant and surrendering Patrick. During his capture, he told the cops he simply wanted to kill as many Mexicans as possible and that he didn't want a lawyer, simply wishing to plead guilty to whatever they charged him with. While the arrest warrant on him has some information, it pales in comparison to the video of his interrogation. This video actually wasn't available until recently, but as far as I can tell, it was obtained by a YouTube channel called The Interrogation Files.
Patrick, before we go any further, is that your name, Patrick? Do you have a middle name, Patrick?
Wood. W-O-D.
And what is your last name?
C-R-U-S-I-U-S.
How do you pronounce that?
Crucius.
Crucius?
First off, it's immediately noticeable that there is a stark contrast between the Manifesto and its tone versus how Patrick actually is. He seems very nervous and his voice is extremely timid to the point where it's hard to even understand what he says, which is made worse by him being clearly hesitant to even open up to the police. Regardless, he does manage to answer a few of their questions.
We want to know what happened today.
Well, I don't know. It's a long story, man.
Well, we're here to hear it. We want to hear it. Because we want to know what happened today.
I mean, I just have violent thoughts, and
Okay.
I've been battling them for a long time, but
Are you under any...
Yesterday, I mean, I didn't think I'd actually do it, but, yesterday I started having, really violent thoughts, and the next day I just drove and did it.
Okay. Where were you yesterday when you were having these
At
thoughts?
my grandma's house. Grandma's.
Okay.
I left when they were asleep.
So you left...
I couldn't sleep at midnight, so I just left and then did it.
So this was in Richardson, at your grandparent...
They live in Allen.
I'm sorry. You're in Allen, Texas, last night,
Yeah.
at your grandparents, and you're saying that you couldn't fall asleep because you were having thoughts.
Yeah, I have them all the time.
Okay. Are you getting any help for that?
I went to a therapist for a while, but I just didn't continue. I didn't think would help.
Okay.
As you can probably tell from the immediate direction this conversation took, Patrick wasn't about to double down on the things he wrote in his manifesto, and instead, he took the psychological problems route. Right in the beginning of the interrogation, he tells the cops that he hasn't been attending school or working, although he claims to still have access to his car. And he says that at some point, he had another job working at a movie theater, which he quit. This means he probably could be doing both if he really wanted to, but he opted against it, just like he apparently opted out of continuing the psychological treatment he mentioned he had gotten at some point in time. Even if the crime he committed was 100% connected to the mental illnesses he was eventually diagnosed with, clearly he did everything in his power to make himself more vulnerable to them in every possible way. Additionally, he says that he gave all of his possessions to Goodwill in preparation for his attack. Although his mental condition was definitely worsened by staying up all night driving, this wasn't some impulsive act. This was a premeditated crime of mass murder, which was in planning for at least a few months by the time it happened. Eventually, he starts speaking in clearer terms about what led up to the attack, which is when he outright says that the purpose of him driving late at night wasn't to clear his head or anything, but instead it was because he didn't want to do the shooting anywhere near Dallas as it would traumatize his parents. Again, even at this point, he continues to concern himself with what his parents think of him, which is pretty telling. And like I said earlier, the truth of his motive really comes out during the interrogation.
Did you have an intention of shooting a particular group of people? What I mean is whites, Mexicans,
Yeah.
blacks, anything like that?
I guess I was bullied in high school by Mexicans, so...
You were what?
I was bullied in high school by Mexicans, so...
Okay. So your intent was to shoot Mexicans?
Yeah, I mean... Yeah.
So you're saying your intention was to shoot Mexicans because you were bullied in high school by Mexicans?
I mean, I rationalized it in a different way, but... You know what I'm saying? But I didn't... That's really what it was. In reality, I guess I just... have an issue with them, I don't know.
Okay. So it's fair to say you don't like Mexicans?
But did I tell you? I posted that thing online.
No. What did you post?
The, like, an explanation of why I did it.
Okay. What did you post it under?
I just posted it on, like, 4chan or something.
On what?
Like, you know what 4chan is?
No. Can you explain to me?
4chan?
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 Just put stuff on there, I don't know.
Okay. But it's under your name? And when did you post that?
I don't remember. I know it was like today, but...
So was it after the shooting?
No, I don't think so.
So it was prior?
I think, yeah.
Okay. And so how does it read when it's posted? Like, do you have a profile name or?
No, it's just anonymous.
Okay.
I mean, I just posted it because I thought I was gonna die, so
Okay.
I thought there'd be armed set. I don't know, right? I thought there'd be somebody shooting back. So
Okay.
I mean, I also have like a in my car, so
Okay.
I'm not sure if you guys found that yet or not.
So again, it was just strictly your target was Mexicans. Okay. And your reasoning for Mexicans is because you said you were bullied by them.
I mean, that's the real reason. I rationalize in different ways. That sounds pathetic to say that's really why I killed a bunch of people, but yeah, that's it.
Okay.
After confessing to this, he confirms to the cops that he planned the attack on his own. When they ask if he has any friends or a girlfriend or anyone to tell about what he was planning, he says that he didn't, which seems to be the case. Oddly enough, he says that his motivation for posting the manifesto was to prevent people from thinking he was a white supremacist, which was definitely not effective to any measurable degree. As their conversation went on, more revelations were made by Patrick.
So you were just holding it, walking into the Walmart.
I think, yeah.
Okay. Did anybody confront you or say anything to you? Do you recall?
I mean, I don't think anyone would approach me with a gun.
Well, yeah, but I'm just, maybe a security guard. Did anybody sit there and say, hey, what are you?
Like I said, I don't think anyone shot at me or anything. I thought it was going to get gunned down, but...
Okay.
And then I'm too... When I ran away, but I'm too much of a coward.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, a few minutes later into their conversation, Patrick says he doesn't even use 4chan or 8chan, and he just decided to post his manifesto on 8chan because he knew that it allowed people to post anonymously. In their entire conversation, there's very little, if any, mention of political topics, as Patrick instead focuses exclusively on his personal motivations for the crime.
You just sat there and said, you know what, I'm going to go to El Paso? Is that what you told yourself, or you just...
I mean, this has been a long time coming. I just didn't think I'd actually do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I just couldn't.
Let me ask you this. What's been a long time coming?
I mean, I've had violent thoughts ever since I was little.
Okay. What kind of violent thoughts?
Just kill stuff. I was thinking it was pretty innocent. Just,
like, what would you kill?
I used to have a little pump gun. I'd just go out and kill a bunch of squirrels and stuff. I mean, just the animals, like that.
Okay.
Never anyone. Somehow.
Okay. So, I know you said it's been going on, these violent tendencies, but when did you tell yourself, you know what, I'm going to drive to El Paso and I'm going to shoot people there?
I mean, I don't know. It's just, I guess I just got sick of dealing with it. I got a lot of issues. Just screw it.
As they inch closer and closer to talking about the actual shooting, it seems like Patrick struggles with even mentioning it, referring to it as the thing that he did. It seems like he's almost in disbelief that he actually carried out this horrible crime, and managed to not be stopped by anybody in the process.
However, these thoughts that you were having, or the fact that it was the last minute that you decided to come to El Paso, did you share this with anybody? Any friend or anything? Okay, so nobody like said, you know what, I'll do something like this with you, but then they might have backed down or anything like that. It's just
friends. Okay, that's since high school.
Did anyone send you to do this? Instruct you to do this?
I mean, I guess part of me wanted to mean something. So yeah, I wasn't like, if you read it, you'll see what I mean. I just didn't want it to be like, I killed a bunch of people and, died. I guess, it's pathetic.
You're saying that you did want to kill a bunch of innocent people?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't, I thought I did it. I didn't realize how bad it would be. I thought someone would shoot back, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? It's all there. If you're gonna die and then, someone would gun me down, but I guess going in there with guns.
After explaining that the car he had driven to the Walmart in El Paso was the family car, he explains to the cops why he was wearing ear protection during the shooting, despite fully expecting to die.
We saw some surveillance footage, of the incident. You're wearing some earmuffs or ear protection. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Where's that ear protection? Why did you wear ear protection?
Because I don't like, I'm autistic, so
Okay.
I don't like loud noises.
Okay. What else are you diagnosed with? You just mentioned that you're
Lots of
autistic.
stuff.
Like what? Can you tell me?
I mean, I'm just on the spectrum. They call it, they just say like you're on the spectrum. I'm just not good with people and antisocial.
Okay.
So they say Asperger's a lot.
Okay. What else? Asperger's?
Just antisocial behavior.
Okay. And you said you're autistic? Okay. Do you take medications for these?
I used to. I used to take like ADHD medicine.
Okay.
A long time ago.
How long have you been off of medication?
It was just when I was little. It's not relevant. It was just when I was little. I took ADHD. I didn't like it, so I refused to take it.
Okay. But how long have you... So you're on no medication right now? You are?
No medication.
No medications.
The interrogation was complete, and much to his lawyer's dismay, Patrick continued to offer up a guilty plea whenever he was asked about it. Besides the victims themselves, the entire community and every family member of the ones who were shot by Patrick were in uproar. And Patrick's own family was also devastated and shocked as to how he was capable of such a monstrosity. Despite the open and shut nature of the case, it took nearly half a decade until a clear sentencing was reached. During these proceedings, Patrick's defense lawyer managed to get him to walk away from his guilty pleas. As Patrick correctly stated previously, it would have led to the death penalty. In court, there was a lot of deliberation as to how extensive his mental issues were leading up to the attack, and there was also mention made of how both of his parents have a history of mental illness and were taking antipsychotic medication. Patrick was ultimately sentenced to 90 consecutive life sentences for his crimes. Now, once the manifesto was posted to 8chan, it seems like even some of the other Anons here didn't believe it was real. Going back to the original thread, one person simply replied, "Hello, FBI," once again, not believing it was even real. But within a matter of minutes, it would become very obvious that this was no false flag. In a continuation of the senseless violence, one day after Patrick shot up the Walmart, another person carried out a shooting in Dayton, Ohio, killing 9 people and injuring 17 others. This is the same shooter I mentioned earlier who had a certain list for which he was suspended from school for writing. The perpetrator, Connor Betts, seemingly did take inspiration, which is such a horrible word to use in these circumstances, from Patrick, but not in the way you may think. He himself had made posts online about Satan and described himself as a leftist, supporting Antifa. He had even liked a tweet that called Patrick Crucius a terrorist and a white supremacist. Meanwhile, 8chan itself was facing a lot of negative publicity. Brenton Tarrant, Patrick Crusius, and a third shooter who killed people in a synagogue in California had all posted their manifestos to the site. As a result, 8chan was dropped by Cloudflare, their DDoS protection service, and the site was eventually rebranded entirely. But Patrick's crime would have a much more far-reaching impact on the daily lives of internet users, although I'll have to give some context in order for you to understand it. The late 2010s were a strange time for internet culture. The previous 5 or so years had been populated by a large anti-SJW wave, and at the time, many people on the left started trying to put together a coherent cultural answer to the heavily online 4chanified right wing. All of this coalesced into a loose movement called the dirtbag left, the idea being that these people are leftists or socialists who are also edgy like the right wing. One of the most important keystones of this time period online was a podcast known as Chapo Trap House, which, along with its subreddit, took the title of an 80s horror movie, Chud, and began using it as a derogatory term against online conservatives. Now, due to how insulated this was in niche leftist online subcultures, the word didn't really take off until right-wingers themselves began using it ironically against one another, which started happening sometime around 2019. Coincidentally, the same year Patrick committed his crime. Just as the term was really taking off, Patrick did what he did. And instead of a mugshot, the picture that was attached to most of the articles about his crime was this one, where he looks like the stereotypical definition of an embittered, perpetually angry, terminally online loser. Naturally, as is the inevitable course of all striking images that get shared online, Patrick's face was turned into a Wojak, often called Chudjack or Polejack, and featured in hundreds of thousands of edits, some of which you've probably seen when scrolling on Instagram Reels. Over time, the image became increasingly distant from its original context, as other meme phrases like billions must die and its variants, nothing ever happens and its variants, and pretty much any retarded edit you can think of. It's getting to the point now where the edits are so detached from the original image that it almost has nothing to do with Patrick himself or his crime. At this point, the Chudjack is just a staple of online meme culture, and people of all beliefs and persuasions are using it, many of whom have no idea that at one point it was just the face of a mass shooter. The development of the online aftermath of Crusius's crime is so nonsensical. In 2025, a new mugshot of his was released and posted to Twitter, and because he looks like less of a basement dweller in it, people's reactions followed suit. Although this kind of thing has always been standard for internet culture, ever since 2020, this has gotten way more insane. There's a ton of AI-generated videos and edits of things like George Droid and Charlie Kirk face swaps, which have become increasingly common and separated entirely from whatever point they were originally supposed to convey, if there ever was any. Whether you think it's disturbing, disrespectful, or if you're able to separate the edits and memes from the original incidents that led to their creation, only one thing is certain. There is no stopping this kind of phenomenon from happening. We can obviously try to prevent the incidents themselves, but once something takes place, it will inevitably make its way to people online who take nothing seriously. Adriana Zandri, the wife of Ivan Manzano, who was killed in the shooting, ultimately gave Patrick a hug in court before his sentencing. In El Paso, there's now a memorial specifically dedicated to the victims of the tragedy. As of May of 2022, he was moved to a prison in a town called Palestine, Texas, where he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. I've been Turkey Tom, thanks for watching, and until next time,